Okay. All right. Shalom, Esther. And we are live. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you may be, and for those who are kind enough to come out in our nice winter weather, a very happy Tu B'Shvat, Rosh Hashana L'Ilanot to everybody. Today's class is dedicated to honor the memory of Oliver, the son of Lyndon Hamilton. He was a true mensch. And today we're going to learn about what makes a mensch a mensch. It's very appropriate. So let me just say on the outset that this idea that we celebrate the New Year for trees is a little hard to understand. And on the surface, it doesn't add up. Yeah, I mean, there's this agricultural cycle in the land of Israel, and we have to know when we start the year and end the year, because that's how tithes are, right? Like you can't do taxes for 2023 in 2024. You got to pay the taxes for the right year and the right time, and if you have tax receipts from your donations that you give now in 2024, you can't use them for 2023. It doesn't work. And everybody has a year's end for their business. It's not hard to understand the concept of a hard line and a reset. And if you have tithes that have to be given, so you're going to have kind of a line to draw. And sometimes it's Rosh Hashana, the famous Rosh Hashana, the first day of Tishrei. That's certain tithes. Most things like vegetables get tithed that way, and the etrog gets tithed that way because the etrog doesn't actually have a season. Etrog grows in all seasons, but other fruits are seasonal. So most trees, in fact, all trees, with the exception of the etrog tree, will hibernate during the winter, and they will be productive during the spring or the summer. So it makes sense that when the tree goes to sleep, that's the end. And there's going to be fruit that's going to be picked. Some of them are fruit that's picked in fall, for example, like apples in Canada. That's fine. But then at some point, the cold weather sets in, and the roots go to sleep, and the tree goes to sleep. And it hibernates. And then it wakes up, and now the sap begins to flow into the roots, and the tree comes back to life, and that heralds a new season. Okay? Very nice. Fine. So what does that have to do with us who are not farmers, who are not even living in the land of Israel? The whole thing is rather incongruous, and I've given multiple classes on this in the past. And what I decided to do this year is to go back and actually study the portion of the Gemara that is probably the single most foundational proof or argument that the concept of Rosh Hashana L'Ilanot or L'Ilan should be relevant for us, even though we're not trees, even though we're people. Because there's a pasuk. And the pasuk says we are trees. And that sounds ridiculous. And the Gemara actually also thinks it sounds ridiculous. And the Gemara questions, well, what do you mean? We're not trees. And the Gemara says, no, actually, we are trees. Which sounds very strange. So the only thing to do is actually study the Gemara. And what I'm going to do is begin the study of the Gemara tonight a little bit earlier than the actual discussion of the peoples being like trees. And I'm doing that because, according to some of the Mefarshim, like for example the Maharsha, in order to understand the Gemara with the tree and what happens in its kindred relationship with people, you really have to understand the Gemara prior. So the Gemara starts off and says, Rava Rami. Rava asked a question. And the reason that Rava asked the question on Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, it's almost halfway through the page, on page 7 of Masechet Taanit, side A. The reason that Rava asked this question, by now you should be familiar with the Talmud. You know that the Talmud kind of meanders. And it doesn't follow like a very, very hard schedule of subjects. And we may mention a particular verse in the Torah. It may in some way be related to the subject at hand. And then we end up saying, while we're on that verse, and we begin to analyze that verse. The Gemara is very much like life itself. It's not square. It flows. It's like, it comes in waves. And it's very real, and it's very raw. And that's the beautiful thing about the Gemara, once you figure out the Gemara style and how the Gemara conveys these messages to us. But I'm saying this for a reason. I'm saying this for a reason, as you're soon going to hear. But let's first learn the Gemara. So Rava Rami, Rava asks about this question. What is the question? The question is trying to understand the deeper meaning of a verse that is found in the 32nd chapter of Deuteronomy, which is a remarkable portion of the Torah. It's called a shira. It's called a song. And this is the very second verse of that song. And Moshe Rabbeinu, after saying that the heavens should listen because he's going to speak, and that the earth should hearken because Moshe Rabbeinu has words to share, all in poetic prose, the pasuk says, Ya'arif kamotor likhi, my portion, which is really my teaching, my Torah, the doctrine that I've given you from Hashem, is going to fall like rain. It's going to drop like rain, like raindrops. And then the pasuk says, Tizal katal imrasi, that my speech, which is also the Torah, is going to flow like dew, or drip like dew. So the question is like, so what is it? Does the Torah drip like dew, or does the Torah drop like rain, or fall like rain? Which one is it? So Rava asks this question. Ksiv, it says Yaref kemoter likri. The Ksiv Tizal kan tal imrasi, and it's in the same verse. So what's going on over here? Which one is it? As Rashi puts it, Hishve lekach lemotar. He compares the portion to rain, and then he says the word Yaref, which the Gemara is going to tell us it represents this concept of something that comes with force. Like rain doesn't fall softly. It rains. Rain comes hard. And rain drops. When you're waiting for the shoe to drop, it's not a soft thing. When people talk about a mic drop moment, it's usually a shocking moment. It's not like a soft little message. It's a mic drop. It's like, this is a big deal. So we use in English, we use this terminology. And I think this is what bothers the Gemara, with the fact that it's called rain and the fact that it's called yaref. The verb that describes what happens sounds like it's dropping. So which one is it? So Rava asks, there seems to be an apparent, almost like a contradiction in this verse. Is it harsh? Is it falling? Is it you getting pounded with the rain? Or is it this soft settling of dew? And the Gemara answers, Im Talmud Chacham Hagenhu, if he is a proper sage, a proper Torah sage, so then the words are soft, and the words they descend, they kind of flow softly. The imlav, however, if the person teaching Torah is not the way a Talmud Chacham, way a student of Torah is supposed to be, so arfehu, you should have him drop off, there's like a harsh approach, a harsh attitude. Now, obviously, this is not the literal meaning of the pasuk, but it is a meaning of the pasuk. That is what we call the drush of this pasuk. Now, Rashi uses a very harsh word. He says, arfehu kematar. He says the word arfehu means hargehu. It means kill him. Now, I mean, the word kill could be used in colloquially. It doesn't have to mean, obviously it doesn't mean kill him. You ever hear the expression kill him with kindness? Or, kind of like, just knock him off. It's not for you. And the reason he takes this from is because, as we see, that the Torah uses the word arifa with regard to the egla arufa. The egla arufa is the story of an unsolved murder, and we create a spectacle. The elders have to come, wash their hands after they've beheaded a young calf, and the symbolism is this young calf was not allowed to grow old and to experience bringing generations into the world. And here's a person who was murdered. It's unsolved. We don't know what happened here. We're not responsible. Did anybody think they are responsible? So as the Rambam explains in Moreh Nevuchim, and the Sefer Achinuch alludes to this, he says this is a way to make a big tumult, because it's not okay when a person dies, and it's not okay when there's a murder. It's not okay when there's a homicide. And as the Moreh Nevuchim points out, when you make a tumult and you make a big deal about something like this, it doesn't go quietly into the night, doesn't fade away. And people start talking. And when people start talking, eventually things come to light. And we hope to solve the murder. At any rate, what happens to this calf? He gets beheaded. It's very harsh. It's not like shchita. It's not slitting the neck. It's a machete. It's harsh, and it's the back of the neck of the animal, and it's done for the purpose of trying to have this murder solved and to make sure that people realize bloodshed is not a little thing. Anyway, the bottom line is Rashi says that it comes from the term of arfehu, which means to kill. The Maharsha has trouble with this. He seems to opine that Rashi is a little bit harsh over here, and he says nida lefarish that arfehu refers to the neck, because that's how you machete that little calf. So he says it means hafchai alav oiref, give him your back, so to speak. Turn your back on him. That's what he means. So cut him out of your life. Obviously, hargeu also here is euphemistic, and this is kemater. Like you let it drop, like a harsh thing. And the Gemara says, indeed, Tanya, we indeed learned something like this. We learned in a Braisa, Hoya Rebano. Oimer, Rabbanah used to say, Kol ha'isek b'Torah lishma, Teirasai nasalei samhachayim. Anybody who involves himself in the study of Torah for the sake of Torah, and what that means is beyond the purview of this class, the Torah becomes a life elixir. Shenemar, as it is written, Eitz chayim hi l'machazikim ba. The Torah is a tree of life, which doesn't on the surface have anything to do with the person being a tree, as you'll see soon. Torah is a tree of life. It's metaphorized as a tree of life. V'aimer, and the pasuk says, Rifus tihya l'sharecha, that the Torah will be healing for your body. V'aimer, ki moitzi motza chaim, those who find me will find life. V'chol ha'osek b'Torah shelo lishma. However, a person who engages in the study of Torah for the wrong reasons, and the idea of lishma means that a person does it for the sake of Hashem, and not in order to obtain personal honor or gain, but if a person studies Torah for self-aggrandizement and self-advancement, so he's like abusing God's Torah for his own selfish aims, and that's considered shalei lishma, and that's not a good thing, and the Torah won't actually be a life elixir, but quite the opposite. The Torah that a person studies will end up causing decay and eating away at that very person, and it becomes a sam hamavis, becomes like a poison. And he says, Shenemar Yareif Kamater. Yareif is this, the Gemara says, Ein Arifa Ela Hariga, and it's kind of hard to understand what the Maharsha is saying, because here the Gemara says it clear. Arifa means Hariga. But you'll see how the Maharsha has an interesting take on this a little bit later on. The Maharsha's basic way of looking at this is, when you see a Talmud Chacham who's not appropriate, give him your back. Turn your back on him. However, the Talmud Chacham himself, the person himself who studies Torah for the wrong reasons, should know that he is causing his own demise. He is hastening his own demise by abusing the Torah. So studying Torah in a selfish way, in a capricious way, in an abusive way is even worse, it seems, than not studying Torah at all.
What's an example of somebody who's studying? Yeah.
What is an example? The example would be of a person who is using the Torah to further their own specific agenda. So, for example, there are some people. I'll give it to you with this metaphor. So they once asked the Dubna Magid, how do you always have the perfect metaphor? Because he was very famous for parables. He says, I'll tell you a story. I'll give you a metaphor. He says, once somebody came to a forest clearing and he saw there was thousands and thousands of targets, and the arrow was right in the bullseye each time. It's right in the bullseye. And he said, this is unbelievable. This guy's got to be the best archer in the world. You know, he should go on the Buffalo Bill show or something like. This guy belongs in a circus. He's fantastic. So he looks for the owner of this little hut, and he finds a guy, and he says, "Those are all your arrows?" He says, "Oh yeah, they're all my arrows." He says, "You're the greatest shot that's ever lived. You're unbelievable. Every single arrow is like bullseye." And the guy said, "Yeah. Every arrow is bullseye." He said, "How do you do that?" He says, "Very simple. I shoot the arrow, then I draw a target around it." So the Maggid didn't have stories that he matched to the Torah. He understood the Torah in a very profound way, and he was very brilliant, and in his creative, insightful way, he was able to create a story that could convey the message of the Torah. So there are some people who have made their minds up. They know what's right, and they know what's wrong, and they know what things that they have to follow and do. And now the question is, how do you get the Torah to say it? So they're studying Torah in order to fit their agenda. That's learning Torah shalol lishma. That's not called studying Torah. That's an abuse of Torah. That's not an embrace of Torah. I'll give you one of the most outstanding or grotesque examples of this. This is, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, when the world was just starting to get crazy. Now it's like way, we've gone into the next realm already. But somebody wrote an article arguing that we should not light the menorah on Hanukkah, or at least we should diminish the lights of Hanukkah. Why? Because CO2 emissions. Because we have to save, the environment, to save the ozone layer, right? Like, never mind that these people are jetting around in private jets. Never mind that people get into one car ride puts more CO2 into the air than probably 50,000 menorahs. But whatever. Let's not. The very notion that you should diminish a menorah is so antithetical to Hanukkah, which is all about increasing light, adding light every day. Right? So this person who's, I don't know how much Torah they studied, but they say they prove it from the Haftorah of Hanukkah, which is the story of Yehoshua, the new Kohen Gadol in the second Beis Hamikdash, and he has a vision, and the vision he sees a grand candelabra, and there's an olive tree that kind of grows next to the menorah, and there's olive oil pouring into the bowls, and this person says, "You see, the symbolism of Hanukkah is about global warming, and it's about the environment, and it's about olive trees, and we should save the trees by stopping to light the menorah." So I can not only, first of all, it's against the Torah, it's the opposite of Torah, and trying to find a message that tells you to diminish the light of the menorah in Torah is certainly a profound abuse of Torah. Now, I'm using a caricature, because this is like very extreme. But you understand that this person's abusing. The direction is not coming from Torah. They didn't come to Torah with a white canvas and say, okay, how should I live my life? What does the Torah have to say? They came to the situation with a mind that was already made up. They knew exactly what's moral and immoral. They have decided on their own moral scale of what's right and wrong. Now, how do I make the Torah say what I want it to say? And the same thing would be for a person who's not looking for the truth of Torah, but a person who's looking for self-aggrandizement. So if it makes me look good, then I'm studying Torah. But if it doesn't feed into whatever my personal vendetta or agenda is, well, then I'm not really interested. That would be Torah shalol lishma. That's not appropriate. Now, to learn Torah lishma, that's a very, very lofty level. I'm glad you could make it too. And better late than never. To learn Torah lishma is a very lofty level. There's a maimer in the short maimarim of the Alter Rebbe where he says that anybody who thinks that they are learning Torah lishma is actually a fool. And he says it's extremely lofty level, learn Torah only for the sake of Hashem. And yes, of course we have our own silly motivations. But there's a big difference between not being wholly devoted to the higher calling of Torah study and to using the Torah study in a cynical and self-serving, abusive way. It's a very big difference. And I'll also mention, since we're on the subject, this is very Gemara-like. We're going all over the place. So we're on the subject of Lishma and Shalei Lishma. The Rebbe would very often cite a teaching. I don't know if this is an original teaching from the Rebbe or something that's written elsewhere, but he would often cite an interpretation of the words mitoich Shalei Lishma ba Lishma. The Gemara says, so should a person not do mitzvahs if he or she is doing it for the wrong reasons? And the Gemara says, no. If you're doing a mitzvah, that's still better than not doing a mitzvah. And mitoich Shalei Lishma, out of doing it for the wrong reasons, ba Lishma, you'll come to do it for the right reasons. So that's generally our approach. You do the right thing, and with Hashem's help, the rest will fall into place. That is our approach. However, the Rebbe would read into this, and I heard this many times from the Rebbe at Verbrengens. The Rebbe said the mitoich, the inside, because that's what mitoch means the core, the kishkas, the intestines, the inner energy of the Shalei Lishma, of the wrong reason, is the right reason. The person just doesn't know. But deep down, his neshama has a yearning and a craving to be closer to Hashem. And that's really what's motivating them. They think something else is motivating them. They think somebody will honor them or somebody gives them a little glory. Okay, that's what they think is motivating them. But really, it's the neshama that's motivating them. Now, if a person is specifically abusing the Torah, that's different. That's when they've taken themselves out of circulation. So to stand against what Hashem says in His Torah, to cynically exploit the Torah, that's not okay. But otherwise, a refined kind of Shalei Lishma is nothing to sing and dance about. As they say, we don't make a kiddush to honor you for learning Torah Shalei Lishma, but at least, it's a... Okay, at any rate, the teaching of Rava is not exactly the teaching of the Brisa, because the teaching of Rava is how you should behave towards this person, and the teaching of the Brisa is what will happen to that person. But it's certainly very similar. And as you'll see, this Gemara does flow into the next Gemara. But here, something very unusual happens. And before I continue, I'm going to tell you, as I have many times, that I don't, as a rule, give you my own creative interpretations. I don't know if my understanding is necessarily Torah altogether. I don't know. The reason that I'm telling you what I'm about to share is original is because I don't know if it's accurate. I don't know if it's correct. But there was something that bothered me about the next few words, and maybe others would say, it's not something to get hung up about. It's not really a diuk. It's not really a big deal. Okay, to me it is. To me, there's something strange going on here, and I think actually once we're going to understand the Gemara, this will make a lot of sense. But the Gemara now doesn't just continue talking about this idea. It's a very similar idea. A person learning Torah for the wrong reasons, a person learning Torah for the right reasons. What precedes that? Who you should learn Torah from. Is that a good teacher? Is it not a good teacher? Choose the right mentor, or give him your neck, or cut him out of your life, so to speak, knock him off. I mean, what we're about to learn would seem to be a natural continuation of that. But the Gemara interjects. And the Gemara says, Omar lei Rabbi Yirmiyah le Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah said to Rabbi Zera, Leisei mar lisnei. Say something. Teach us something, would you? So he said, Omar lei chalash liboy. I'm not feeling well. My heart is weak. My heart is... It's a euphemism. It means like I'm not up to it. I'm not feeling well today. So because I'm not feeling well today, so I don't feel that I'm able to pull myself together and exert myself to be able to teach you a halacha. So he said to him, you're faint-hearted. You're not feeling well. I'm not able. So he says, okay, fine. Leima mar milta da agadata. Then say an agadic teaching. So I have, I'll ask you three questions. First of all, why is the Gemara even interjecting with the story altogether? We had a teaching. We have another teaching. Why is it important, the details of how this teaching was related? What does it contribute to? How does it contribute to the understanding of the teaching? If there's a teaching from Reb Zera, the Gemara could simply say, along this vein, Amar Reb Zera, or Amar Reb Yirmiyah, Amar Reb Zera. Like, what the difference is if he was up to it or wasn't up to it? And it has to be recorded for posterity. We have to read this in the Gemara. Why are we recording this? Who cares? None of the Mefarshim I looked, I couldn't find anybody who speaks about this. It bothered me. Number 2. So he says, oh, you can't teach a halacha? So teach like a story. There's no like stories in the Torah. In fact, it says, Rov Sodot HaTorah, most of the secrets of the Torah, gnuzin ba'agadata, are encoded into the Agadata. And the same Rabbeinu Shlomo Idlish the Maharsha, who wrote commentaries on the Gemara, which is called Chidusha Halachos, which is on Rashi and Tosfos and on a practical halacha, also wrote Chidusha Agados. Very brilliant insight into the Agada itself of the Gemara. And sometimes to understand the Agadata is much more difficult than to understand the simple Gemara. The simple Gemara is straightforward. It's just the Gemara tells you a story. It's a story. Okay, as they say, take it or leave it. What is the issue exactly? When you have a situation with Agadata, it's much harder to understand. So it's not a small thing. And I would even go so far as to say that to take a profound philosophical teaching, which really could change our perspective of Torah, of the Jewish people, of our relationship with Hashem, of the world at large, and to put it into some kind of poetic prose or along some narrative, a storyline, a parable, is much more difficult than teaching a halacha. Halacha is straightforward. Here's the halacha. You need a halacha? Here's a halacha. Halachas doesn't have to be a deep halacha. He said, teach me something. Was there nothing Reb Zera could teach Rabbi Yirmiyah? He says, I'm not up to it. Oh, not up to it? Then work even harder. It doesn't make sense to me. I know some people say, Agadata. What Agadata? If you learn the Gemara right, and I try to, it's very hard to understand Agadata. We have some of the greatest minds. We have the Maharsha, we have the Maharal, we have the Chok Yaakov and his Sefer Ian Yaakov, we have the Ben Ish Chai and Ben Yehoyada. I mean, those are great Talmudists who came along and explained. The Rebbe spent a lot of time explaining the stories of the Gemara. It's not simple stuff. So that's the second thing that's kind of throwing me off. And the third thing is, the teaching is not very agadic. It's actually halachic. It's halacha. He's telling him who to learn from and who not to learn from. It's not very different from the first teaching we started with today, from Rava's teaching. It's an exposition of a verse in the Torah, not a halacha. And Rava's teaching and Reb Zera's teaching are almost identical. And here it's presented as some kind of agadata, and earlier it's a regular Gemara. What changed? So I don't know. I think these are fair questions to ask, especially if you can maybe come up with an answer. So what I'm going to tell you now is I didn't find. There's no audio. No, should be audio. Anybody else having a no audio problem?
Very interesting. You're about to give a personal opinion, and there's no audio.
Look at that. Maybe Hashem is telling you, be quiet, you bozo. No. It's not really okay, whatever. The only reason I'm telling you that's a little bit original is because maybe I'm wrong. But I would like to suggest the following. There's a commentary on the Megillah, which is called Yesha Elikim. And it's written, I think, late 14th century, early 15th century. Very, very fascinating commentary. Wasn't printed for centuries, and it was only printed, I think, in late 18th century for the first time. And he cites teachings from Torah teachers of the previous generations. And in the Megillah, in the 4th chapter, we have Mordechai coming to Esther and telling her that you need to go to the king. And she's like, yeah, I'm not going to the king. Forget about it. You know what he did to the last wife who just showed up and didn't exactly follow orders? You must be kidding. And Mordechai says, I'm not kidding at all. We're in big trouble. The Jewish people will survive. The question is if you will survive. And maybe this is the whole reason that you're in that place. It's like, that's what you came for. And then you're not going to execute the mission that you were sent on? You need to do this. He speaks very harsh words to Esther. And Esther's shaken. And Esther sends a message back to Mordechai. She says, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. I need you to fast. Get everybody to fast for 3 days. And I'm going to fast for 3 days. And my attendants are going to fast. I'm going to fast for 3 days. Okay. And that's what happens. And then in the state of extraordinary weakness after not eating for 3 days, Esther shows up at the king. And of course, the whole thing makes no sense. You're supposed to look your best. She probably didn't look her best after not eating for 3 days. Maybe she used a lot of makeup. I don't know. But so what's up with the 3 days of fasting? Especially because it seems like unusual and unreasonable and like, could you even fast for 3 days? And by the way, it's 3 consecutive days. So in the Sefer Yesh Elikim, he quotes a 13th century Torah sage whose name was Shmayahu Ikriti, or Akriti. This Shmayahu Akriti was from, I think he lived in Italy and in Greece, kind of moved around and he ends up in Spain in the end of his life. One of the unique things that he did, besides writing commentary on much of Tanakh, he was very much engaged with one of the local monarchs, and he was able to do things on behalf of the Jewish people. And he also spent an enormous amount of time and energy trying to bring the Karaite Jews back home to Torah mitzvahs, which the Rambam says that it's a mitzvah to. So he was like a real, like a Chabad shliach of the 13th century. And in the end, he was so successful, I think, that his enemies kind of denounced him to the authorities. They said he thinks he's Mashiach. And he was arrested and put in prison, and tragically he died in prison. But this is the story. This is this great tzaddik and Torah leader, Shmayahu Akriti. So the Yesh Elikim quotes the Rabbi Shmayahu Akriti with the following. I'm going to read it to you. To'elet hatzom la'adam, the purpose, the value of a fast for a person, lehitkabel bakashato, so that his request should be accepted l'fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yoser mima'asim acherim, more so than anything else. Like, why fast for 3 days? Maybe give tzedakah for 3 days, learn Torah for 3 days, pray for 3 days, say the book of Tehillim 30 times. There's a lot of things you could do. Why fast for 3 days? He says, Ki kishayotzum ha'adam, when the person fasts, ve'yifne milehishtamesh b'kochosav hagashmius, what happens is he's not using his physical strength, because at some point he doesn't have any more physical strength. And ve'yardimam, the physical strength or will or ability, is almost like it's barely alive. It's like you're very lethargic, and you're it's like you have no koyach. And what happens is, because you have no koyach, because you have no strength, so how does a person do sins? Not when you have no strength. When somebody is totally depleted, he's not doing any sins. He's depleted. So the Shmayahu said, that at that point, that his power to articulate himself as a yid would overpower him. And the godly intellect will radiate. And he'll be able to absorb his inner soul, his inner rhythm, his inner spiritual dynamic in a much faster way. He'll be able to absorb it much more quickly. Person didn't eat, person is in a weakened state. People somehow are more refined. If you ever visited people when they're very, very sick, they're generally not very mean and selfish when they're very sick. People are a little more spiritual. And he says that the physical drive, the drive for lust and pleasure and self-aggrandizement, natural drives that the body has. So what happens is these are all diminished. And when they're not diminished, they're chotzet sod ben hanizrach or ben hazorech. You have a neshama radiating, but it's supposed to be radiating out to you when your material side is getting in the way. So he says, Uki yisren zichas ha-sechel umiklotei boi, ken yisren shchinas Hashem alav. Just like a person could be much more thoughtful when they're in that kind of situation, they could be much more sensitive, so too also that the Shekhinah, that the presence of Hashem that goes with each person expresses itself in a much more profound way. And you feel the hand of Hashem. When people are humbled and they're weak and they're tired and they're exhausted and they're humbled, he says there's no question that they'll see the hand of Hashem in a more profound way. That's what he says. And Rabbi Shmuel basically goes on to say that Esther asked Mordechai to get the Jewish people to fast for 3 days. Laharida ma'keches hagashmi. He says, what did they do wrong? They went to the Achashverosh's party. They engaged in acts of immorality. It was not a pretty scene. There was harlotry in the vessels of the Beis Hamikdash, and kosher food and non-kosher food, and all kinds of strange enticement going on. And many people caved into their lusts and desires. It wasn't good. And Esther believed that there is a beautiful neshama at the core of each person. But you have to get people in touch with their soul. And she believed that by weakening their bodies, they would get in touch with the soul. Now, whether this applies in today's day and age is another question, but that was Esther's approach, according to Reb Shmuel. And he says, that's why Tzivsa sheyosimu kol hashgachosam aleh, she gave this command, she said, let them fast, and she knew that they would feel the presence of Hashem. And she knew they would do tshuva. And the Yesha Alekim finishes off Visfasayim Yishak. And this is like so beautiful, you could kiss it. And he says, Ad kan l'shoineh. He's actually quoting this Rishon, this 12th century Rishon. So here's my thought. Rav Yirmiyah comes to Rav Zera and he says, I want you to teach me something. I want you to teach me something. So Rav Zera says, I'm not really up to it. I'm not up to it. I'm tired. I'm feeling weak. And Rav Yirmiyah says, oh wow. Then teach me Agadata. Then teach me a secret. Then teach me something which is not just halacha. If you're feeling weak like this physically, then I want to hear something unbelievable. Okay, maybe I'm crazy, but this is this is my little chiddush. Could be wrong, I don't know. It helps me understand. It helps me understand the Gemara. And the idea is not my idea. I'm taking it from the Rishonim, but I'm just kind of attaching it. And this will make the question that I'm going to ask you much bigger, because we learn this Gemara. The Gemara is like, what? What is the Gemara saying? But if you look at it this way, you say, aha, so there's something really profound going on here. What might that be? And then we'll see how the Gemara is actually conveying an extraordinarily profound message, a life-altering message. Okay, so let's go into the Gemara now. So Reb Zera says, Amarle, I'll tell you something. Want to hear something wild? Listen to this. Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. This is what Rabbi Yochanan said. My dechsiv, what is the meaning of what's written? Ki ha'adam eitz hasada. For the person is the tree of the field. What is the meaning of what's written? For the person is the tree of the field. V'chi adam eitz sadahu. Is a person a tree of the field? Ella. So rather, mishum dechsiv, because it is written, ki mimenu tochal, oto lo tichrot. When you're going to eat from him, don't cut him down. That says about a fruit-bearing tree. Vichsiv, and elsewhere it's written, oto tashchit, vichoroto, that you can cut the tree down. So when does it say that you can cut the tree down? When it's not fruit-bearing. Okay, tzad. What is the message over here? We started off by saying that a person is like a tree. And then we went off to talking about the concept of cutting a tree down or not cutting a tree down. And what is this business of cutting a tree down or not cutting a tree down? What does it depend on? It depends if it's a fruit-bearing tree or if it's not a fruit-bearing tree. So what does this mean? And that's of course the continuation of the psukim. Kilo eitz machal, rak eitz asher teda. If you go to verse 20, this is verse 19 of the 20th chapter of Deuteronomy. If you go to verse 20, it says, rak eitz asher teda, the tree that you know, that is kilo eitz machalu, that it's not a fruit-bearing tree. Oto tashchit, go ahead, you can cut him down, cut the tree down, and you can use its wood to build uvanita matzor al ha'ir. You build a blockade against the city. Asheru oseh imcha milchama adridta, the city that makes war with you. So now you are using the right to defend yourself, not by waiting for an attack and then responding, which is not the Torah way. It's a very bad idea. You don't get to choose how you respond, and you're always going to be reacting. But when you see you're going to be attacked, launch the offensive first. Haba lahargecha, a person who comes with baleful intent. Hashkem v'harogoi, kill him first. It doesn't say, let him kill some people and then go and kill him. That's vengeance. Torah says, kill him first. So by the way, the business that unfortunately in Israel, we wait to be attacked and only afterwards do we respond is an un-Torah attitude, and it's wrong. Plain and simple wrong. The right thing to do is, when you know an attack is being planned, attack first. Like they did in 1967 and haven't done since. That's what needs to be done. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So the Gemara says like this. Here it says, don't cut the tree down. It says, a person's tree of a field. Then it says, lo tichrot. Lo tichrot. Don't cut it down. Why? And why? Because it's machal. Because you're going to eat from it. So don't cut it down. Because he's a person. But then it says, cut it down. So it depends. It depends if this is what kind of person this is. Im Talmud Chacham Hagun, if he's an appropriate Torah scholar, so mimenu tochel, eat his fruit, meaning his teachings. V'oto lo tichrot, and him don't cut down. V'im lav, and if he's not, oto tashchit v'choroto. Then you should cut him down and cut him off. That's the Gemara. That's the big Agadata. It's like almost verbatim the teaching of Rava. Expounding a different verse. Now, it's a little hard to understand what exactly the question of the Gemara is. We take a look in Rashi here. Rashi doesn't really comment. He says, V'chi adam eitz sada, ela makish adam le'eitz hasada. Is a person a tree? No. A person is likened. A person is metaphorized as a tree. It is likened to a tree. Ma eitz hasada im eitz machalhu mimenu ta'tochel. If it's a fruit-bearing tree, enjoy the fruits. Oto lo tichro, don't cut him down. Kach talmidei chachamim. So that's how you treat a Torah scholar. Im haganu, if he's learned, if he's appropriate. Pardon me, haganu means right, appropriate. So then mimenu tochel. Lamod himenu. Eat from him means learn from him. Vim lav. If not, says Rashi, oto tashchit. Then cut him out. Sur me'alav. Turn away from him. Cut him away. Cut him out of your life. Okay, so here's the problem. The problem is that we have multiple examples of people being compared to trees. And nowhere else do we have this question. Is a person a tree? Nobody asked the question. You know, there's a famous chapter of Tehillim, Psalm 92, and it says over there, Tzaddik katomar yifrach. The tzaddik, he will blossom like a date tree. Ke'erez balvan and yishge, he'll grow tall as a cedar, the Lebanon cedars. Is he a date tree or is he a cedar tree? So this is a question. This is the question they discuss. What's up with both? And the Gemara, in this very same tractate, on Daf Chafei, on page 25, comes along and says, can we make our minds up? Dara Shebichia bar Lulaina, and Rabbi bar Lulaini said, what do you mean tzaddik tamar yifrach? Ke'eres bavanan? In them tamar, if he's a tamar, lamenem eres. Then why do you say cedar? It's not the same tree. You're using one metaphor, stick to it. Which one is it? If it's a cedar, why a date tree? The Gemara answers, Ilu neymar tamar v'lo neymar erez. If it would only say a tree, a date tree, it wouldn't say a cedar tree. So then there's a question of sometimes the tree is chopped down, but it's able to replace itself, and one can, and one can't. The Gemara goes into offer a whole answer. There's a beautiful teaching for the Baal Shem Tov that's quoted by the Maggid that the Rebbe speaks about in Likkutei Sichos, where there's two kinds of tzaddikim. There's the tzaddik who engages in helping others, and the tzaddik who just is tall and stately for himself. Very nice. Nowhere did the Gemara say, what do you mean? V'cha tzaddik tomaru? What is a tzaddik, a tree? No, the tzaddik just want to know which tree it is. Our issue was, is it this tree or that tree? But nobody seemed to have a problem with the fact that it says, tzaddik atamar yifrach. The tzaddik should blossom like a tree. Why? Because a tzaddik should blossom. How should he blossom like a tree? There are stately trees. There are all kinds of trees and different realities of trees, and trees that can regrow themselves, regenerate, and trees that can't regenerate, trees that have fruit, and trees that don't have fruit, trees that have shade, trees that don't have shade. That's all fine. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor. No, it's no question. Okay, so it's a metaphor for you also. You know, you have to ask this big question. How come you don't ask? How come the same Masechet, the same tractate, just 20-odd pages, 18-odd pages later, doesn't ask the same question? That's a different question. It asks a question similar to the question of Rava. Is it rain or is it dew? Is it date or is it cedar? That's a question. We have a Mishnah, a very famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, in the 3rd chapter, the 17th Mishnah. It says that anybody whose wisdom is greater than their deeds, what is that like? What would you compare that to? And the Mishnah says, Le'ilan. It's like a tree. Oh, look at that, a tree. What's the tree? Sha'anaf of merubin, that has got a very wide branch spread, v'sharash of muatin, but very, very narrow roots. So it's top heavy. And he's very wise and learned and intuitive. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Who are you looking for?
The Jewish talk.
You've come.
Okay.
Welcome.
I'm supposed to walk in front of the camera.
The camera's here. You're good.
Thank you.
Have a seat.
Thank you.
So the Mishnah says a person who is very wise and very sagacious and very learned, but doesn't do very much with it, he's top heavy. And what will happen? On a nice sunny, balmy day, everything's fine. However, when there's a bit of a windy day or a hurricane, haruach ba va'ikarte va'hefachte alpanav. It's got no roots. It's going to get blown down very quickly. There's a fascinating story with. I think this was Lord Balfour, although it might have been Winston Churchill. If you can Google the story, it's easy to find. So they came to what was called Palestine at the time, and the question was, the Jewish question: what are we going to do with the Jewish, to have a Jewish state or not? And Tel Aviv is a fairly new city, so they wanted to make it look European and stately, and they wanted to have a tree-lined boulevard. But the problem was that you can't just grow trees in 3 weeks. They take many years to grow, but Tel Aviv is a new city. So they uprooted trees from another place, and they planted the trees in the shallow ground, and there was a little girl who climbed up one of the trees to see the ceremonies better. And the tree swayed, and it went over, and one tree knocked the other tree, and all the trees got knocked down. And the whole thing. And as my memory of this little historical event goes, I don't know if it was Churchill or Balfour, he gave a speech on roots. He said, you have to have deep roots. If you don't have deep roots, you're not going to be able to weather a storm, which was a very poignant message being conveyed to the Jewish people, that to remember, like Tel Aviv is not a new city. The Jewish people coming to Israel is not a new enterprise. We have very deep roots. Okay, so it doesn't really take a rocket scientist to come up with this metaphor. It's a simple metaphor. What's unique in the Mishnah is that the Mishnah seems to be comparing wisdom to branches and deeds to roots, which sounds backwards, right? So the Rabbi Yaakov Bereb Shimshon was one of the outstanding disciples of Rashi. Rashi's commentary here is very pithy. He doesn't really say very much. He just said that Lo Meid Harbe learns a lot of Torah, but any Mekayim, he doesn't fulfill the words of Torah. But the Rivash goes into more details. He says, Hamaisa, the action is the shoroshim. Actions are the roots. And mipnei shehu ikar. Ikar means the mainstay. That's really what it's about. It's about, you got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk or think the think. He says you have to do it. So we say that's the meaning of lo ha-medrash ikar. It's not the study which is primary, but the word ikar is also like root. That's how you say roots, right? So the idea of shoresh and ikar are interchangeable. So he says lo ha-medrash ikar. That's not what's the main thing. That's not what anchors you. Ela ha-maisa. Now we have the Rashbats. Reb Shimshon ben Tzemach Duran has a similar approach to this. He says shoresh ha-chochma heim ha-maasim. The origin of wisdom is deeds. But that doesn't sound very logical. In fact, wisdom brings you to deeds. You learn what to do, right? So what does that even mean? So he explains himself. He says, the question is, why are you studying Torah? Are you studying to be wise? Are you studying to be insightful? Are you studying to know lots of interesting stuff? Or are you studying because you want to be a better person? Because you want to put these teachings into action? And that's the roots, and that's what grows from it. So if you're trying to live a Torah life, and you want to absorb the Torah's message, and that's what motivates you to study, then you have deep roots. Obviously, the actions will follow what you learn, but the question is, why are you learning? What is motivating you? The actions here are not the practical actions, but rather what is the cause, what is the motivator, what is the prime mover and shaker. Those are the roots. Anyway, this is a Mishnah which is worthy of much study and much analysis. I just gave you two examples of a verse in Tehillim which calls a tzaddik to trees, and nobody seems to have a problem with that. And the Mishnah is looking for the right metaphor of a person who studies, but not for the right reasons. They want to be wise, and they want to be impressive, and they want to be insightful and educated, but they don't want to do anything about it. And the apt metaphor is the tree with lots of branches and no roots, or vice versa. And Kevin is asking a question. He wants to know if it's better to be like a sapling than the oak which is rigid and can't bend. Each has its virtues. Being able to bend a little is a good thing, and also to be a good strong tree is also good. But that Kevin's question is precisely the point. We use these metaphors. We use a lot of tree metaphors. Right? Like there's in popular culture, there's a thing, be like a tree. Be like a tree. Okay, fine. So we're trying to see the forest for the trees. We're not seeing the forest for the trees. Like, what is going on over here? What is the issue of the Gemara? The Gemara says, is a person a tree? Why? Because we use the metaphor of a tree, of a person? And it gets even really stranger. Because if you look in the pasuk itself and you study Rashi's explaining of these verses, he says, it's Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 19. It says, Kisatsur al ir yamim rabim. So we're besieging a city. By the way, the city is outside Israel. The reason why we're besieging the city is because these people are planning to attack us. And we have no choice but to defend ourselves. Not to wait to be attacked and then defend ourselves, but to go on the offensive. That's the Torah way, as I mentioned before. So we're going to besiege the city. And there's rules of when you besiege a city. You don't violate the Shabbat. If they attack you, you violate the Shabbat. If they're coming for nothing more than straw, kash v'teven, that's all they ask for, but they're making a demand, you muster the troops and you go to war on Shabbat. But here, when you're launching the preemptive attack, what do you have to do it on Shabbat for? You do it at least 2 days before Shabbat. So you're coming Yomim Rabim. Yomim Rabim is a few days, at least 2 days before Shabbat. Lehilochem aleh, l'safsa. Why are you besieging the city? He's trying to capture it. That's why. Because they're digging tunnels. Because they're launching rockets. So you need to capture the city. Because if you have no control of the city, then you're placing your lives in danger. Your country's not safe. So you don't wait for an attack. You capture the city. All right. So you lay siege to the city. So the Torah says, when you lay siege to the city, lo tashchit et eitzah. You don't destroy the fruit trees. Lindoach alav garzan, to wield an axe against it. Why not? Kimimena tocha. Because you can eat from this. What are you cutting the tree down for? You could eat from the tree. This is not a tree-hugging statement. It's very clear it's about fruit. The very next verse, as I talked about earlier, says, if there's no fruit, you can cut it down. That's fine. So we're not supposed to cut this tree down. Why not? So Rashi says, Ki ha'adam eitz hasada. This is how Rashi explains. Rashi says, Ki here is mishamish b'lashon dilma. Ki, as we read in Rashi multiple times, can come across in 4 different ways. Here it's like saying, is it then? Is it this? Is it what? Is it a person? He says, Shema Adam Eitz Hasada. How is the tree threatening you? If you have a person, the person comes out, it could be a Trojan horse. You don't know what this is. So you gotta take this guy down right away. You're at war with these people. This is an evil enemy. They want to kill you. You have no choice. You're at war. You're at war. You're at war with a tree. Is the tree a person? You're not at war with the environment. You're at war with the people. Bad people, you have no choice. You're going to war. You're defending yourself. What do you want for the tree? What did the tree do to you? He says, for some reason that you're laying siege on the trees, that you're trying to starve the tree into submission? You're trying to dehydrate the tree? What are you destroying the tree? What are you punishing the tree for? How does taking the tree down enable you to more effectively prosecute the war? It doesn't. So don't do it. A person will come along and say, well, how does killing people help you in a war? My dear, it's tragic. War is hell. That's what happens in war. That's the way war is. It's not possible to wage war any other way. And if you wage war like that, your own soldiers are going to be killed, tragically. That's the way it goes. So, you do what has to be done in war, but destroying the country for what reason? Why are you destroying the land? So, if you read the verse literally, the verse is saying a tree is not a person. It doesn't say the tree is a person, it says the tree is not a person. You're at war with people, your enemy is people, your enemy is not the tree.
But it still could be destroyed by accident.
Of course it could be destroyed by accident, but here it's going to wielding lindoach alav garzin means you're wielding an axe against it. I'm not saying that when we go to war, you have to be careful about the trees. No, you have to be careful about the lives of your army. That's what you have to be careful about because that's your job. That's what you have to do. Obviously, it's not a consideration, but to just destroy trees for no reason, that's just inappropriate. By the way, the concept of not being wasteful and not being destructive is very similar to this. It's a sin in the Torah to be destructive. Let's destroy for no reason. Laying land waste. Well, why? You're fighting, you're in a war, you want to defeat your enemy. That's it. You want your enemy to surrender. And when your enemy surrenders, that's it. It's done. You don't believe in vengeance. You don't believe in any of that. It's very simple. It's a very simple calculation. When you come to the situation where, God forbid, you need to prosecute a war, there's no holy wars. That's not our faith system. That you'll never, ever find the term Melchemet Kodesh anywhere in Judaism. You'll never find it. You find Melchemet Mitzvah. And simply translated, it means a moral war. We fight moral wars. Immoral wars should not be fought. We fight moral wars. If the war is a moral war, then it has to be fought. It's a horrible thing. It's a terrible thing. It's not different than amputating a leg of a child or watching a child die of flesh-eating disease. Does it make you cruel? No, it makes you compassionate. What are you going to do? What's your choice? If you don't go to war, we see what you end up with. So the pasuk doesn't say that a person's a tree. On the contrary, the pasuk says a person is not a tree, which makes this Gemara even stranger. The Gemara comes along and says, is a person a tree? And what's the answer? Well, yeah, I mean, kind of like a tree. It's like a tree. It's like a tree because if you have a Talmud Chacham, but they're not giving fruit, then don't engage. But if they are good, then engage. Like, 1 second, that doesn't make them like a tree. I give you 2 examples. So we have metaphor which we glean from trees, and there's no issue. Doesn't mean a person's a tree. It's just a metaphor. You could learn from anything. A person could be like a cup too. If you have a hole, everything goes out. Don't have a hole in your cup. Okay, fine. You ever heard the expression, a lachin cup? A lachin cup means a hole in the head. It's a euphemism in Yiddish. I once heard, I don't know if this is true, that there was a fellow who came by to get some wine from the Rebbe. The Rebbe used to lead the benching at the end of Yom Tov. He would give Kreis Shel Bracha. So he came to get there was thousands of people coming by, and this person came, and the Rebbe said to him, I gave you already. Thousands of people. The Rebbe knows, the Rebbe said, I gave you already. So the guy said, cup. I had a hole in my cup, he said. But he used the Yiddish and English together. A cup is a cup. He said, I have a lachin cup. So the Rebbe smiled. He says, lachin cup, was it helfen geshebracha? It's a euphemism. It doesn't mean a hole in the head. Like in English, they say, I need that like a hole in the head. So they said, lachin cup, was it helfen? The Rebbe smiled. They gave him more geshebracha. So does that mean a person's a cup? A person can be like a cup. If you learn and you don't retain anything, you're like a leaky cup. It's not a very effective way. What? A person's a cup? You just said a person. No, I didn't say a person's a cup. I just used the example of a cup to say that we have to work on retention. What is the issue? Gemara comes like a thundering v'chia. Adam makes a sada. What? And the Gemara says, well, yeah, we can learn from a tree. Okay. How does that answer the question? And really, like I pointed out to you, what even is the question? Because on the surface, it doesn't seem like much of a question. The way Rashi explains the verse, there's no question there. On the contrary, the pasuk is saying the tree is not a person. The pasuk is not saying the tree is a person. The verse says the tree is not a person. That's why you shouldn't cut it down. If it will be a person, you might cut it down. So the Maharsha has a very interesting way of explaining this. The Maharsha says, Lefi Pshutei, in Pirush Rashi and Chumash, he says there's like no question here at all. On the contrary, the person is not a tree, and the tree is not a person. That's why you don't cut him down. So the Maharsha says, who is the subject in Parsha Shoftim? Who is the subject in the war? Who are we talking about? People or trees? Think about this. Who's the subject? The subject is... No, it's not. Because if the pasuk would be saying, don't do something to the people, then the people would be a subject. Why? Because a person is like a tree. But the subject here is not the people. The subject here is the tree. So if the subject is the tree, it shouldn't say, ki ha'adam eitz hasada, because the person, lo tichros ki ha'adam eitz hasada, don't cut him down because the person is the tree. It should have said, lo tichros eitz hasada ki ha'adam. Don't cut the tree down. He's not a person. So it's inverted. And the fact that it's inverted leads us to the conclusion that there is another way of reading this verse. There is the literal way of reading this verse, but all the verses of the Torah have many different ways of reading them. And the fact that the Torah chooses to word it in a way which allows for a different reading indicates that there is a secondary message. What is that secondary message? That you read it in what we call binichuta, as a statement. Not with a question mark, but with a period. Ki ha'adam eitz hasada. That's the question of the Gemara. The question of the Gemara, says the Maharsha, is that this verse can be read without using Rashi's fancy footwork of the ki as a dilma, as one of the four ways. But if you read it the other way, it's ki ha'adam eitz hasada, because the person's a tree. So the Gemara then, according to Maharsha, is asking, why would the Torah say that? In other words, it's not a question that the Torah's message is different. We know what the Torah's message is. But when the Torah words its message in a very particular way, there must be some kind of secondary thought, some kind of additional idea which is being conveyed to us. And so the Gemara is saying, when I read it that the tree is not a person, I know what it means. Don't cut the tree down. The tree is not your enemy. You're at war with another army. Fight the army. When the army masquerades as citizens and citizens engage as army, you're at a war with the nation. Okay, fine. You're not at a war with a tree. What did the tree do to you? So he says, the tree didn't do anything to you. So don't cut the tree down. Then it should have said, the tree is not a person. But it says, ki ha'adam eitz hasada. And the way, it doesn't even say, ki lo ha'adam eitz hasada. The lo is before. And because of this, it turns out that there is a reading in which ki ha'adam eitz hasada, because a person is a tree. That was the question of the Gemara. So what could the message possibly be? What could that possibly mean? It doesn't make any sense. A person isn't a tree. Didn't sound what I'm saying? That's how the Mashal explains the Gemara. And as the Rebbe points out, clearly, when you learn the Mashal right, from the question of the Gemara, there is, without any doubt, a subtext in this verse of the Torah that is stating, quite frankly, that a person is a tree. Not that you can learn a lesson from a tree. Not that there is an idea. And the Rebbe points out in a footnote, this is in a Sikha in Chelik Chavdalad, the Rebbe says that we have oftentimes the question that's asked in the Gemara when a particular metaphor is invoked, and we want to know, why do we use this metaphor? So the Gemara would use a language like, Lama nimshal. Why was the metaphor drawn? Why was this illustrated as such? Lama nimshal adam leitzasa. Why was the person metaphorized as a tree? The Gemara doesn't say that. Because the pasuk doesn't read as a metaphor. The verse reads as a statement. Ki adam eitzasada. And that, so, okay, if that's the question of Gemara, and that's a very powerful question, and it's a very good question. David is asking, can you cut down trees in battle if they help save lives without any question whatsoever? That's a purpose. The point here is don't cut it down purposelessly. That's the point. Is it true that if a person's deeds exceed his learning, he will retain his learning rather than the opposite? I mean, there's some truth to that, Kevin. But it also helps to have a decent memory, and most importantly, review. Review. That's, if you want to retain learning, you have to review on a regular basis. But that's another story. Okay, so then what's the answer? If that's the question of the Gemara, if the Gemara's question was, so why is a person simply stated a tree? What does that mean? And what's the answer? Well, we can make a metaphor. Make a metaphor doesn't answer the question. So the Gemara has to clearly be saying that a person is a tree. How is the Gemara saying that? How does this answer, how does this metaphor come across with that kind of answer? So the Rebbe says a remarkable thing. It's a rather lengthy rumination. It's not just a commentary on the Gemara, so I'm going to kind of cut to the chase, leave out a lot of portions of the Sikha, and I encourage everybody, this is an amazing talk to study in and of itself. But as to our issue, just to understand this Gemara properly, and ultimately to walk away with a deeper and better understanding of why we celebrate Rosh Hashana Leilanot. So the Rebbe invokes a maxim of the sages. This maxim is found in the Medrash Tanchuma and Parshas Pekudei. And the Medrash is also elaborated on in the 31st chapter of Avos de Reb Nosson, which is like a codicil to the Pirkei Avot, much, much lengthier Mishnayot, many more Mishnayot, many more teachings. It didn't make it into the traditional Pirkei Avot Masechet as we have it. And over there, in both of these disparate sources, similar genre, but there's not really much crossover, there's a statement which is made. And it says, Ha'adam hu olam katan. A person is a miniature world. Every person is a miniature world. And just like in the big world, we have a division of 4 forms of life, and this is a very broad kind of division. Obviously, we have 4,000 forms of life and 4 million forms of life. But very broadly speaking, there are 4 forms of life. So too within each and every single person, you can identify these 4 unique forms of life. The 4 forms of life are domem, the inanimate, which includes everything from lava to rocks, from water to gas, anything which is inert. From soil to metals, inert, things that aren't. They don't change. They are what they are. Any change that there is because of wind or erosion, but there's no life in them. They seem lifeless. And then we have the form of life which is called vegetation. Everything from moss to redwood trees. And these things grow. They live, they die. Some of them live for thousands of years. Some of them live for a few months, but they grow, they're in a state of flux. The tree's adding rings, the moss gets greener, and then eventually it dies and turns brown. And that's called vegetation, tzomeach. because the sign of its life is its growth. It doesn't have independent life. Trees don't go for a walk. And then we have chai. Chai is something which has life, which is independent, an independent form of life. And really this can include everything from the tiniest of insects to the largest of animals. As long as there's life within it, it's in motion. It's in motion, it's mobile, it's not rooted to one place. It doesn't need to have roots in the ground to live. If it's a fish, it needs water. If it's a land animal, it needs atmosphere. If it's amphibious, it can switch gears. But the bottom line is, you need an atmosphere to live in. You don't need to be tethered to a certain place. You need nourishment. You don't need to be tethered to a certain place. Some of these animals can hibernate for months on end and not eat. And they have enough fat to consume and everything's fine. And other creatures have to sleep every couple of hours. And the body has to regenerate and they have to be able to... But they're all independent forms of life. And then from a Torah perspective, there is one form of life that towers above all others, and it is the form of life we call humanity. Human beings, according to Torah, are created in God's image. That doesn't mean God didn't create other forms of life. It means human beings are created in God's image. You cannot murder a tree. You cannot murder a dog. You cannot murder a rhinoceros. You can kill it, and it might not be a nice thing to do. Hunting for sport is not a Torah way of living. The way the Aboriginals in this country hunted is exactly the meaning hunting is for. They killed an animal and they used it. They used everything from its teeth to its bones, from its skin to its hair. The Aboriginals used every little detail. For that kind of hunting is fine. Hunting for a joke, for sport, is cruel. It's not appropriate. But whatever, let's leave that as an aside for a moment. The point is, only human beings are created in God's image. And that makes us unique. Now, science is not going to agree with this. In the scientific nomenclature, a human being is just a Homo sapien, a smarter animal. And they've identified various forms of human beings. And they have humanoids or hominoids and different kinds of brains and different kinds of consciousness. What exactly this means, I'm not 100% sure. I do know, for example, that Yehuda Halevi wrote that there is a place in Africa where there is a creature that is somewhere in between human beings and between animals. And, well, in fact, they found a form of human life that they believe lived millions of years ago, but that doesn't faze me, the timing, called the Homo naledi. And the Homo naledi had a brain that was about 40% of the average human brain, a very small brain, but the Homo naledi used to honor its dead, which means they believed in an afterlife. So they were aware animals don't bury the dead per se. They don't honor the dead. They don't create burial crypts and so on and so forth. It's a human thing to do because it means you believe in an eternity. Now, in many ancient societies, pagan societies, they believed in the body. So even when they believed in the eternity of the soul, they were busy preserving the body so that the soul can have an afterlife. But the concept of an afterlife is unique to a human being, because it means you have to be able to understand something which is not apparent, something which is not in front of you. The animal understands what's apparent. It knows when it's faced by danger. It knows what it needs for its food. It deals with situations. It reacts. It can only understand the reality as it sees it, as it interprets it for its own welfare. And animals can be very clever in saving themselves. Everything from the skunk that can spray you to the animal that can hunt you. But this is all about survival of the animal. You can't reason with the animal and explain to him that there's a higher way to live and let's talk philosophically now. It doesn't work that way. Only human beings are capable of this. So we don't see human beings, if you look at the world as in a secular way, in an ungodly way, if you don't look at a neshama, so what makes a human being inherently different? It's a form of life. Oh, a smarter form of life, so what? But if you look at the world as created by God, as we do, and that everything's created with a mission and a purpose, and that when Adam Rishon is created, we say, aha, this is Rosh Hashana, this is when the world gets meaning. Why? Because Adam Rishon can make the choice to serve God, because he can see and understand that which is outside the apparent and the obvious and the tangible and the visible. So those are the four worlds. And because because of this, then you're also going to have within each human being these four realms. the inanimate, the inert, the vegetative, the animal, or the live, and then finally the consciousness, the intelligent, and the human. And this is something that the Alter Rebbe talks about in Torah, the Likutei Torah. It's an idea that I think is rooted in some Baal Shem Tovonian teachings, and very possibly earlier teachings also, very, very possibly rooted in the teachings even of some of the Rishonim. But this is a teaching that gets developed and refined in Chassidus in a very, very meaningful way. And Alter Rebbe explains, he talks about the concept of, even within the body, of the inanimate and the inert. For example, he says like bones, teeth, they don't change, it's inanimate. Then you have things that grow, like hair, nails. Then you have the living part, the person's, the life. And then you have consciousness. So he identified, even within a person's body, he identified these 4 different levels. And then the Alter Rebbe goes on even to identify that within a person's neshama, within our psychoschematic reality, our spiritual reality. And he explains there that our midot are very much vegetative. Midot are our emotions. If we are a morose person or a joyous person, if we are easygoing or anxious, this is the way we relate to the world around us. You have the same situation. 2 people looking at the same situation. One is blowing gaskets and the other isn't. What's the difference? It's the same exact situation. Say, well, you can be calm because you, well, yeah, same situation. It's a temperament. Temperament, this is called midot. Now, we have to try to engineer our midot, but although we are expected to make ourselves into more refined people, to totally transform your temperament is, I won't say impossible, but extraordinarily difficult. Very difficult thing. So what happens? You can see within small children, you can identify certain things, identify temperaments. There are kids who are, little prima donnas, and kids who are very easygoing. And as they say in Yiddish, there's an expression, kleine Kinder, kleine Tzaros, große Kinder, große Tzaros. The little kids is one thing, and then when they get older, it only gets more difficult. It doesn't get easy. Like a difficult child can end up being an extraordinarily difficult adult. Or not. Sometimes your kid is rambunctious and very creative. And those, when they turn into adults, if they only get a decent education and a child rearing, they can become fantastic citizens. Why? Because they don't just sit back and watch it happen. They like to make it happen. They have creativity. They have personality. You can see that. You can see a child with personality. You can see a child who's bold and see a child who's timid. You see a child who's aggressive and you see a child who's passive. These are midot. It's the way we react to things. So what happens? What happens is they grow. It's like a tree. It's the same tree. Same place. Doesn't go anywhere. It just grows. Keeps growing. And then we have the animal or the life part of it. The person's intellect, you could totally uproot your way of looking at things. You can forget the temperament. A person can grow. A person can learn things. A person can become educated. A person can become adept, professional at certain things. A person at one point of life didn't know anything, and then they totally turned themselves around. And they went and educated themselves. And they found out all kinds of amazing things. Or as a result of circumstances or their environment or experiences, they became wiser, more intuitive. And it can be something that's totally different. You see 2 people, similar brain power or capacity, very different because of their experiences. One was smoking pot in school, and the other was actually applying themselves. A variety of reasons as to why. Or one learned from their experiences, and the other one didn't. That's like the chai element. And then the human element, this is already like the spiritual side of a person, and so on and so forth. That's like the... So, if we are to talk about the vegetative element within us, what would we be referring to?
You said emotion.
Emotions. And this, then, the Rebbe says, is the question of the Gemara. This is the question. Is a person sized up by their emotions or a person sized up by their intellect? What makes a person a person? What is the most important thing that a person has? Neither? Neither is a...
Deeds.
Okay. Deeds come from somewhere. Let me put it this way. It would seem that the midot are on a lower level than a person's intellect. However, you've all heard the expression, that person is a mensch. What's the difference between the mensch and the non-mensch? Mensch is just Yiddish, just like in English, people say like, be a man, whatever. Like what mensch just means, it means a refined person. It speaks to a person who's sensitive. It speaks to a person who's kind. It speaks to a person who's compassionate. It speaks to a person who's benevolent, giving. Those are mensch things. A person you could trust. Their word is a word. Their commitment is a commitment. They're very smart people, but they're not nice people. A mensch is a nice person, a person you can rely on. And so this becomes the question. What is the most important measure of a person? The Rebbe says that's the question of the Gemara. Is a person a tree? Is a person to be sized up by his or her emotions? And what does the Gemara answer? The Gemara says, actually, yeah. Because the highest form of intellect as far as us Jewish people are concerned, Torah Jews are concerned, is Torah. So what kind of Torah teacher should you find? The smartest Torah teacher? No. The Torah teacher who lives by the ideals that the Torah teaches. What are the ideals that the Torah teaches? Well, the first ideal that we know from Torah is that v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, that loving somebody like you love yourself is a klal gadol b'Torah. If somebody has no ahavat Yisrael, they don't love others, they don't care about others, and they're not considerate of others, and you can be very, very smart. You're supposed to learn from that person. How could you? Get rid of him. That's the message of the Gemara. That's the deeper message here. Because just saying that who you learn from or don't learn from, the Gemara already said it earlier. That was in the first piece of Gemara. Rav Yirmiyah said to Rav Zera, your materialism is down, you're feeling weak, teach me something deep. Teach me something spiritual. And so Rav Zera said, I'm going to teach you something spiritual. The idea that the Torah makes a statement that a person is a tree is telling you that you don't judge the Talmud Chacham by virtue of the Talmud Chacham's wisdom. You judge the Talmud Chacham by the virtue of the Talmud Chacham's interactions, what they give to somebody else. If it's a tree that's just a tree, that doesn't give fruit, that's not a mensch. It's very stately, it's not a mensch. But if it's a tree that gives fruit, then those fruits you should eat. That's the deeper message here. And now the Gemara makes a lot of sense. So this is the Gemara's question. We already explained what the Gemara's question is. It was very nice. If that's the Gemara's question, so what's the Gemara's answer? The answer is this is not just a little metaphor. This is a hallmark and a defining essence of a person. So you want to know what a person is? A person's a tree. But don't see not see the trees for the forest. Because you look at this Gemara, it sounds like little details. You miss the tree. When you say a person's a tree, we're saying the person is the vegetation, the person is the tzomeach, the person is the midot. Midot tovot are the most important thing. Many a wise person will say that when they're giving advice to people who are dating, they say, look for a mensch. Look for a person who's compassionate. So they won't be the biggest genius. So they won't be the brightest bulb. So they won't be the sharpest knife. You don't want to look for a fool. Look for a person who has midot tovot. Midot tovot is said to be the most important detail within our humanity. And it's interesting, in Yiddish we call it a mensch, but when we speak about the greatness of one's humanity, we speak of a person who's a true humanitarian, we're not talking about their brain, even though humanitarian comes from the term homo sapien. We're talking about their menschlichkeit. And that is why the New Year for trees is celebrated by people. Because the message of the New Year for trees is all about the fruit, like it says in Shulchan Aruch. How do we celebrate this? Not by planting trees, by eating fruit. Because we're emphasizing what's given, what the tree gives, to tell ourselves that we should be like a tree and ask ourselves that question, what are we giving? Because we are judged, the measure of our greatness, of our achievement, is what we give to others, not what we achieve for ourselves. That kind of makes sense, I think, of the whole Gemara. It answers all the questions that we asked. There's another whole element here I prepared. There's a Tosfos and and a shach milchus Talmud Torah, but I think we covered this. Yes, you have a question.
Well, just the Jewish perspective, since we're in here now, all trees give life. We breathe in what they breathe out. We need them.
Yeah,
Even
yeah,
a
yeah.
tree that doesn't give fruit.
True enough. I mean, there's, let's just say, for the Jewish perspective, we don't do anything to be destructive. Even when you're cutting down the tree that doesn't give fruit, you
We rely on them.
yeah, of course, but you're cutting down the tree for a purpose. The pasuk says very clearly, why are you cutting down the tree? Oto tashchit v'karata, you're going to cut this tree down, uvanita motzar al ha'ir, and you're going to build the blockade against the city. So you're using the tree. We don't believe in destroying things. You don't destroy anything. That's always wrong. So I have a friend who's a developer, and they were cutting down some trees to build houses, and a friend of his calls him and he says, "My daughter has a question for you." And he puts his daughter on the car phone, and the little girl says, "Mister, are you building this and this?" He says, "We are building." He says, "Why are you cutting down God's trees?" So my friend is a pretty smart guy. He said to the girl, "Do you live in a house?" She said, "Yes." She said, "Do you think other people should have the right to live in a house?" She said, "Oh, I think everybody should have the right to live in a house." He said, "Who cut down the tree for you to live in a house?" So to cut down trees so that people should live, we're not anti-using lumber. It's okay to use lumber. It's not okay to waste. We don't want to waste things. The ultimate purpose of everything that Hashem created is hakol bara l'chvodo. Everything was created for Hashem's glory. Our job is to serve Hashem. And all of the residuals that Hashem provides for us are vehicles and mediums and mechanisms and conventions through which we are supposed to fulfill our destiny, our mission, and our purpose. And we do it best by being a mensch. Because the truth is, ha'adam is the eitz hasoda. Make sure that you're giving fruit and providing for others. And I'll just finish with the idea that tzedakah is considered to be one of the most extraordinary mitzvahs of all. And the mitzvah of tzedakah is all about giving to others. And of all the mitzvahs that we could possibly do, our sages tell us, gedola tzedakah, that tzedakah, what we give for others, is the greatest. And tzedakah doesn't only mean for a person who's impoverished. Tzedakah means to be mindful of somebody else's needs and provide them that which they're missing. Sometimes people need a shoulder to cry on. Sometimes people need a smile. Sometimes people need friendship. Sometimes people need respite. People need a lot of things. And an act of tzedakah is not something that we give only with money. You can give tzedakah on Shabbos also, and it's not just by pledging. Money is a major part of tzedakah. It's not the only way. It means to be a giving person. So gedola tzedakah, shemekareves es haga'ula, that tzedakah, more than anything else, is what accelerates the process of redemption and makes our world the perfect, goodly, godly place that it was always destined and will, Emir Hashem, soon be, because ha'adam eitz hasada, we are judged by how we treat others. So let us have more avos Yisrael. Let us treat others as Hashem wants us to, and let us hope, Emir Hashem, that as a result of that, Mashiach will finally come and bring us into a beautiful new world of peace and serenity and God consciousness. B'mheira ubi ameinu, speedily and in our days. Amen. Thank you for joining online. Please like, please share, please subscribe if you aren't yet, and let's keep spreading the messages of Torah. And thank you all for coming tonight. Yasher koach, Laila tov, good Shabbos.